Another day. Where was I when I was so rudely interrupted by things not working right? I've hooked that spring back up where it should have been on the right side of that little tab, so that's now sprung loaded in the correct way and won't disconnect from the arm on the blade actuating ring. Put the retard gear train in place. It's the shutter cocked, it is. I'm already off to a bad start because I've got the wrong tweezers in my hand. Make sure that the piece at this end is on the right side of that. It centres up on this tab on the blade actuating ring. If you get it incorrect, you end up with something bent and damaged, and will cause you grief. Checking this is seated correctly. It looks good. We fire the shutter. That works correctly. That's looking promising. So the self timer, or the delay action if you prefer. Let's get this in place. Single screw at this end. Just checking that nothing's tucked in where it shouldn't be. No, that looks good. And screw at this end. Levers that go on the top. That sits in a little hole in the top of that plate. The pivot. Get in there, that's better. This piece sits here with a screw on the top. A lot of shutters have a washer at that point. It takes the slop out of the arm. I'm not sure if this one does or not. It doesn't look like there's any slop to speak of there. The spring. It really should go on before that arm. Let's just swing that out the way a bit. Oh, I can get it underneath. I'll just run this down so I can get that spring on there easily. Get that spring in place. Get this back in its pivot point. Put this little lever in place, which drops into that notch. Where are we? Which way up have I got this shutter? Put that on. I'll just turn this over and cock the shutter. It's cocked. That's the top. That should be in the lower position. Now the self-timer should go as far as I can tell. Let's try the release. Not a sausage, nothing happened. Perhaps the shutter's not completely cocked. Feels like it. Okay, something's jammed up. What? The shutter is released. It's failed to operate the self-timer. I think the arm on that blade actuating ring is not far enough over. What happens if we release this? That's not running down at all. It's not set. This lever's not set correctly. Okay, you can see what's happened there. Let's just take this off. I've got this in its pivot point correctly, but I didn't have it over the top of that pin there. Like that it should be. This is a comedy of errors, this one. Okay, let's try again. I'll cock the shutter. Release the shutter. Self-timer is running down. Shutter fires. Okay. Well, that took some organising. Pity I wasn't watching what I was doing, but you can't have everything. Okay then. Well, I think I don't know whether to close this up completely at this point. Well, that's obviously got to go on before the speed ring, so I can't really close this up completely and put it back on the camera. I'll just put my retaining ring on the front there for the moment. Keep that in place. So the final closing up has got to be done on the camera body. I can get it about as far as that and no more. So if I was doing no more to the camera body, it would go straight back on at this point. That's the arm that catches the shutter release. Cocking action happens here. So I think it's worth putting it back on the body and seeing if it behaves. The body, as you can probably tell from this, is somewhat dirty and dusty, and I'm going to strip that down and clean the lot. But for the purposes of testing the shutter for the moment, because that may be all you've come here to see, I'll fit the shutter back to the body at this stage. So let's put the shutter back on the body. See something catching on something? Oh, the edges down here of the casting need to tuck under that plate. It's that shutter release causing me grief. Oh, I know what it is. I haven't soldered my flash wires back on yet. I'd better do that, otherwise they'll catch on something and cause me grief. Just pop this back on and I'll put the cover back on the front to keep everything tidy and do my soldering. Right, wires all soldered back. Let's see if that'll do the trick for us. Well, what do you know? Get the shutter back in now. There we go. That seat appears to be seated. Pop in 4 screws and see what happens. That we'll just put in 2 for the moment, I think. I open the back of the camera. No, we're not quite, the timing's not right between my gear and the shutter. I haven't got that correctly placed. Let's take that off again and see what's happened. I may have not had the winding in the correct position when I put the shutter back in. We'll cock this shutter. Oh, okay, yeah, I'll probably a tooth out there. Let's check the start position of this gear. So that's the start. Holding that on the front, what happens? Yeah, the shutter's going. That was the self-timer you could hear running down because I'd left it set. We'll unset the self-timer. What have we got? Yep. That functions. Shutter appears to work. Right, so if I was to finish fitting the shutter back to the camera, what would I need to do? We'll pop our other two screws in here. They can be done up tight. The retaining ring has to come off because I've got to lift off my shutter speed setting cam ring. This piece needs to go in place. Now there's a small plate that goes on the lever here to help keep the dust out. Make sure we get that the right way up. Looks like it goes on like that. And it goes over there like that. Two screws go into the plate here to hold that in position. What have we done with that shutter? Was that half? Yeah. Right. That lever's all in position. That's fine. Get this on in the correct orientation. There's our B lever, there's the slot, goes there. This plate goes there. The retaining ring goes on the front. It's not going on properly. Well, in the interests of tidiness, I think I'll put the top cover on at this stage. If we were only servicing the shutter and no more, this would be what you'd be doing next anyway. And there's a second screw which was visible down there. And I believe this is the one. Which is interesting because it does not look like the original screw. I would say that someone had worked on this camera in the past and the original screw had got lost. Because I don't see any extra screws here. Right, so what about the rewind? Now there was a central piece here. On the camera only just. then the spring, then the knob, and on top of the knob we had the dial and a single screw. And I've caught that catch mechanism in there somehow. That's not sitting square. That's caught under the top cover. Here we go. That's better. That knob's still not sitting down square. There it is. So the body is back together, and all we have left to do is close up the front. I'm not put the leatherettes back on the front of the camera because I'm going to strip the body down, but you get the general idea. Now I'll just unscrew that front group and remove the aperture settings ring. I've disturbed the diaphragm here, I can see that now. I'm going to be very careful about that. Something has dropped out. One or more of the blades is not sitting correctly in its holder now. Over here. Alright, let's pop it. I'll deal with that now. I'll manoeuvre those blades back into position carefully with using a tip of a toothpick. I was just going to remove the front of that so as I could more conveniently clean the stuff here, but that's obviously not going to be the case today. We can swing these blades inwards, we'll be in business. It's that blade there in particular. Well, it might be going to be a crash course on how to reassemble the diaphragm of a Vito B, I think, at this rate. Right, let's see if I can get this to cooperate. That looks pretty circular to me. I think I've got all those blades back in position. I have. Okay, well in that case, let me pop that front group back in there before I do anything else stupid. That's good. Now I'll go back to doing what I was going to do, which was clean all the back of this lens because it's absolutely smothered in dried grease and impacted dust and dirt. Unfortunately, the grease is coming away quite easily with some naphtha. It's a fairly steep helical thread, but as you can see, the profile of the thread's very unusual. It's not the usual thread profile we're used to seeing. This one is much more like an Acme thread. Normally you would be seeing a multi-start, fairly fine thread doing a job like this. Here they've chosen to use a single thread. Yeah, single thread, but it's a very coarse Acme type thread profile. And the lens itself I'll need to clean. This glass surface is fine, it's in really good order. I suppose that's hardly surprising because it's been kept safe from the elements. And this should just screw in. And it does. The action is smooth. And really only requires a little bit of lubricant there. I'm looking at the internals of this lens. I can certainly see some dust on a glass surface down inside there. This retainer ring is unusual. It has one notch, not two. Normally the retainer rings have a notch either side, which makes it much more convenient to connect to them with the sort of tools you're most likely to have in your toolbox. With only a notch on one side, really you want a cylindrical tool with one peg on it, which of course I don't have. I think I can get at that glass surface from the other side when I remove that front group, so I'm not going to muck with it now. I'm going to put some lubricant on that. And here I'm just going to use some helical grease. This is, what the hell's that stuff called? Helimax XP. Optical and instrument helical grease. Oh, that's a nice smooth action, that one. Okay, so that's on. It's only a single start thread, so it can't go anywhere, can't go wrong.